There was a time when tactical shooters weren't about kill streaks or loadouts, but teamwork, communication, and tension. For PlayStation fans, the series was SOCOM. Today, let's take a look back at SOCOM as a whole, the games, the vibe, and why so many of us miss it.
To really understand SOCOM, you have to go back to the early 2000s. Online play on consoles was still new, a little janky, and super exciting. The PS2's network adapter opened the door to something totally different. SOCOM wasn't just another shooter. It was the online experience for PlayStation players before Call of Duty and Battlefield dominated.
SOCOM wasn't run and gun. It was dense. You had no response in most modes. You had to talk to your team. Every match was its own little war movie. This wasn't the kind of game you could breeze through solo without thinking. If you weren't careful, you get picked off instantly. And then you'd be stuck watching your squad trying to clutch the round without you. The way it forced you to actually communicate was revolutionary for consoles at the time. On PC, that kind of tactical teamwork had a foothold already. But on PlayStation, SOCOM was the game that introduced a whole generation to voice chat. And it wasn't just the mechanics, the atmosphere was something else. You'd hear distant gunfire cracking through your headset, the crackle of your teammate's mic. The tension was real. Every decision mattered, and made even the smallest maps feel like battlefields. It had authenticity without being a sim. Real Navy SEAL consultants helped design the missions and loadouts. The guns felt weighty. The maps felt like real places, not just playgrounds. And while most people talk about the multiplayer, the single-player campaigns deserve more credit. You weren't just running and gunning. You commanded AI teammates, issued real-time orders to hold position, flank, reach doors. It felt like you were actually leading a SEAL team, not just play as a lone hero. Sure, the AI wasn't perfect. Sometimes your teammates would get stuck or do something dumb. But for its time, it was incredibly ambitious. It was tactical, it required patience, and it rewarded planning over reflexes. It's the kind of single-player shooter experience that's rare today, where so much is just about spectacle and set pieces instead of strategy and control. SOCOM 2 is the game everyone remembers. It was the series at its absolute peak. It refined everything that worked about the first game, and added more maps, more weapons, better balance. The controls were tighter. The voice chat was clearer. It was the complete package for tactical fans. And the maps, SOCOM 2's maps are legendary. Crossroads, Frostfire, Desert Glory. Each one had its own personality. They were tight enough for tense CQB fights, but open enough for strategy and sniping. Online, the community was fierce but tight-knit. Clan battles were serious business. You actually knew other players by name. People formed teams, trained strategies. This was before social media and massive party systems. You built your reputation by how you played. Of course, there were exploits and cheating, but even that became part of the SOCOM mythos. It was messy, raw, and fun as heck. It was one of those games that people stayed up all night playing, the kind you remember 20 years later. SOCOM 3 felt like it wanted to be the big blockbuster sequel. The maps weren't just larger, they were massive. You had sprawling deserts, rivers you could control in boats, vehicles you could drive, and so many different approaches to each objective. For some players, that was amazing. It really opened things up. You could flank for miles, set ambushes, use mounted guns, or coordinate vehicle convoys with your squad. It made battles feel like full-scale military ops, but it also changed the game's core identity. That intimate room-to-room tension from SOCOM 2 was harder to find when maps were so big. lot of the matches turned into long-range sniping duels, or people camping objectives in vehicles. It required a different kind of planning, but it lost that knife-fight feel that made SOCOM 2 so beloved. Matches could drag, coordination was harder because your team might be spread out across a giant terrain. And even though SOCOM 3 had more customization, different gear loadouts, camo patterns, weapon attachments, was a double-edged sword. Some loved the depth, others felt it unbalanced the gameplay compared to SOCOM 2's tighter, more symmetrical setups. It wasn't a bad game at all. It was ambitious, and for many it's still a classic. But it was the first time SOCOM really started splitting its fan base between those who wanted the original's tight tactics and those who liked the new scale and sandbox feel. SOCOM Combined Assault was kind of a strange turning point. On paper, it was one of the most feature-rich SOCOM games. It had a full-length single-player campaign that you could play solo and online co-op, something that was still pretty rare for the time. You and up to 3 other players could run through the entire story mode together, giving it this pseudo-squad campaign vibe that almost felt ahead of its time. It made the missions feel less like isolated tasks and more like shared tactical operations. It also added new weapons, gear, and refined the interface. It looked and felt like a slightly more polished SOCOM 3, but at the same time, something felt off. The campaign and multiplayer were built on the same maps, which made things efficient, but it also made things feel samey. Missions started to blur together, and the classic multiplayer experience, which had been its own beast in earlier games, felt like it was being pulled into the campaign's shadow. It was clear they were trying to streamline everything, connect the solo and online experiences into one seamless system. But in doing so, SOCOM started losing its identity. The game tried to be a jack of all trades and ended up feeling less focused. Still, Combined Assault had its fans. It was content-packed, and it kept the PS2 SOCOM community alive a little longer. But it also marked the beginning of SOCOM trying to be something broader, more marketable, and less like the gritty, tactical cult classic it had started as.
When the PS3 generation arrived, people hoped for a true next-gen SOCOM. Instead, we got Confrontation, a game that had the right idea but launched buggy and unpolished. Patches eventually improved it, but the damage was done. SOCOM 4 was the big push to modernize the series, more cinematic, more accessible, but it wasn't what longtime fans wanted. It felt like I was trying to be a cover shooter like Gears of War instead of that hardcore tactical experience people fell in love with. By then, other games were eating SOCOM's lunch. Rainbow Six Vegas had its own tactical style. Call of Duty was blowing up with fast-paced action. SOCOM just lost its place. The decline of SOCOM wasn't just about one bad sequel. It was about a changing landscape for shooters. The industry was moving toward big-budget, cinematic campaigns.
Fast respawn multiplayer, XP systems, and unlock trees. Players wanted instant action, rewards popping on the screen, progression they could grind, and publishers wanted games that sold annualized sequels and microtransactions. SOCOM was for a different era. It demanded patience. It rewarded communication over reflexes. It wasn't something you could easily monetize with skins or battle passes. When Sony shut down Zipper Interactive in 2012, it felt like the final nail in the coffin. Not just for SOCOM, but for a style of shooter that doesn't really exist anymore. It wasn't just a series dying. It was a whole philosophy of game design fading away. And yet, SOCOM isn't forgotten, far from it. Fans still keep it alive on private servers. People talk about their old clans, they remember their callouts, the clutch rounds, the rush of being the last one alive with your team counting on you. Every time Sony announces a new PlayStation showcase, those same players cross their fingers and hope, is this the one? Is SOCOM coming back? There's a hunger for tactical shooters again. You see it with games like Insurgency, Ready or Not, even Rainbow Six Siege, but nothing has quite captured that specific feeling SOCOM had. If Sony ever decides to bring it back, I hope they remember what made it special. Not just the name or the aesthetic, but the soul of it. That slower, tenser, more thoughtful style that made every match feel personal. What about you? Did you play SOCOM back in the day? Which one was your favorite? What was your clan name? I'd love to hear those stories in the comments. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out my other retrospectives. Thanks for watching, and here's hoping we get to hear Bravo Team move out one more time. Catch you in the next one. Cheers!